it was him and 5 or 6 other guys I could name that were always the top guys and always wanted to be like. And I think his family had such an impact on the sport that I think it's I don't know what else to say about it. It's important to me. So without going into big, long, dragged out, I want to introduce Scott Wallenberg so he can introduce the next inductee of the Hall of Fame. Scotty?
Check 1, 2. Got to do that just to make sure we got the right sound level.
Absolutely.
All right with that? Everybody hear me okay? Well, the first thing I want to say before I start talking about the next inductee is what the next inductee, which is my father, Wally Wallenberg, what he had to say about the folks that got their awards before him tonight, starting with Martin Horn. My dad, we went to Martin's shop, and going to Martin's shop was like going to Nirvana, because you rode in this road, which was kind of a motocross track just to get into the back of Aero PA. And I do remember blowing, we didn't have tie downs then, we had chains to put the bikes on and cranked them. Well, when you hit that road at Martin's with the thing in the back, I know a couple of guys where the chains, our buddies, chains exploded and bang, bent up the bikes, just getting to Aero PA. But maybe, you know, Martin was a businessman and he probably was thinking, well, you know, I just picked up a few bucks here just from people coming in and out of the road in front. The other cool thing about going to Aero PA was you could test the bikes. He had a track laid out around, I want to think it was a dump or something, because, you know, if you missed a turn on a Bultaco or a shift, you'd have a bumper in your face from a car that was there, or an old refrigerator or something else. But you did get to try it out, and I can say this, I almost bought a Hodaka from Martin, or a Sherpa S100. Martin was telling us how, don't worry about the shifting on the right side. Anybody can learn to shift on the other side. But the thing I didn't notice till later was Martin was riding a Penton with a Sachs engine that already had shifting troubles, that shifted on the left, and he made some kind of jack shaft arrangement to shift on the right. So he had that. So Martin also said you never needed to have a passenger on the back of a motorcycle. He said you should never have to hold on to the rider in front or the strap. He goes, if you just sit English style in the saddle, you'd never fly off the back. Well, Martin never rode on the back with my dad. So I don't know if that would have worked or not. But anyway, he had lots of great things. And I bought my first pair of full-bore boots in 1970 for $69.95 at Aero PA. Saved a lot of money. And I was so excited to have full-bore motocross boots. And I wanted to break them in, so I wore them to school. Now, I was the only kid in a school of 5,000 students at Evanston High School that rode motocross. And to walk around in your motocross boots, everybody thought I was pretty weird. But I liked it, and I got to break in my boots. So anyway, that's the story I have about Martin, one of them, and there's lots of them. Okay, when we talked about the Stepanovics, I know that my dad, he just loved Emil, and he looked up to him, and they were around the same age. But you could see when we wanted to be Slowpokes members that, you know, that the Stepanovics they were really top shelf. And in fact, I'll tell you this little story about Emil and George that I don't think Debbie or Bob know about the story, but the Jack Hill Memorial in 1971, I was racing the 100 class. I had never won a trophy yet. I kept trying and trying. One time, we were at a really muddy race in Illinois, and the guy who had the spot for a trophy in front of me, his number plate had slipped sideways. He had number 1 on his plate, but it moved sideways. And the scorers were checking it as a blank, not as the number. And so and this guy standing up there looking at the sheet going, gee, I think I won that race. And it turned out that my dad had told him no, they moved it. And so I got aced out of a trophy because my dad was telling the scorers. This wasn't at Elkhorn where they didn't have these problems. But the Jack Hill Memorial, I finished 7th place in the 100 class, and they didn't have a trophy. They gauged how many trophies you got by how many entries. And so they didn't think they'd have that many 100 class entries that day. But they had enough so that 7th place, I was eligible for a trophy, but Emil Stepanovic said, I'm sorry, Scotty, as everybody called him then. I'm sorry, Scotty, but we don't have an extra trophy here right now. But George went in the back somewhere and found a trophy that was unnamed, and it was a pretty good sized trophy. And they said, wait a minute, we found your trophy, Scotty. And George handed me this beautiful trophy for 7th place, and I still have it on my mantle today. You know, that was a big deal. As I think we all know, the first trophy is just an amazing thing in your racing career. So I want to say that about the Stepanovics. And then as far as Ted goes, my dad was really, he didn't know Ted that well, but he was very honored of the fact that Ted would ask me to be one of his guest instructors at the motocross school, because I said, hey, I got this invite to go to a motocross school to be a guest instructor. He goes, well, I remember Ted in his orange leathers, my dad said, racing at Santa Fe and following his career a little bit. He goes, you know what, that's going to be a great experience for you, whether or not whatever you do, teaching others to ride and learning from him would be a good experience. So that's something I want to add on that. So thank you, Ted, for inviting me. Tribute to Wally. Okay. Let me tell you a story about a man I call my dad. They even call him Wally when he was just a lad. He joined the famous Slowpokes in 1917 and started racing moto when he was 43. Motocross, that is. OSAs and CZs. Well, the first thing you know, I had to get a bike. With Wally in charge of shopping, I knew it would be right. He got me the Monarch so we could live the dream. With all of you beside us, we made an awesome team. Motocross, that is. Whoop-de-doos and dirt. How did it happen? Wally was born on April 4th, 1926 to Swedish parents in Chicago. And the Swedish thing is very important, as you'll find out through my whole motocross career, what that meant. Because when he was 6 years old, he lived in Sweden for a year and he learned the language, my dad. And he came back at age 7, but he had an interest in tinkering with radios. And when he was 7 years old, I just found out this story. He built a radio in Chicago in the basement that interfered with the police channels. And nobody could figure out what was happening on this deal. And the cops came to the door looking around, and they were going to smash, I think they did smash his radio. They couldn't put him in the jail at 7 years old, but that's what he liked to do. He liked to tinker and build things. So when he was 14 years old, he bought a Harley-Davidson JD 1926 and 5 bushel baskets and a manual, and he built his first motorcycle and rode it. And he said at that time, it didn't have a battery, and a motorcycle battery was way more expensive than a car battery. And so my dad strapped a heavy car battery on the handlebars so that he could ride it. And anyway, he said he did hit a curb and the battery went flying, but he had a motorcycle, and that was a big deal for him. And later on, he got a Henderson 4, which some of you may have seen the pictures I posted on that. That was his second bike right before he went into World War II as a radio man. And he worked on a ship for 4 years on a sub-chaser. And he was the radio guy. But then he graduated and he went to Northwestern and learned radio and television repair and technology for a couple of years. And he married my mom, Ruth, who is here tonight, and us kids, my sisters, Lynn and Christine, are here. And for a weird reason, decided to open up a television shop 100 miles north of Green Bay, Wisconsin. And he was the first TV guy up in that area. And the iron mine went broke, though, and we moved back to Chicago, and he worked 3 jobs in Chicago, selling TVs, working at somebody's shop during the day. He fixed people's TVs at night, and he even had a route going to taverns, setting up their electronic popcorn sales machines, called Popcorn Says. So he had those 3 jobs. But the TV thing, he finally moved us out of Chicago into the suburbs in Evanston. He opened up his first TV shop in Wilmette in 1960. But the earliest I remember, he did say he rode a motorcycle, but we never had that thing going on until 1968. He traded an 8-track tape player for a Honda 50. Just a little Honda 50 motorcycle. And that just rekindled everything about motorcycles to him. So what did he do? What everybody does when they get their first bike. He immediately started figuring out how he could get another one and a bigger one. So he bought an X6 Suzuki Hustler 250, and it was a total street bike with low pipes and everything. And we had a friend in the neighborhood that he rode with that had a Honda 305 Dream. And they said, hey, let's go up to we used to go to Santa Fe Speedway and watch on Wednesday nights and the TT, and I loved the big jump they had for TT. But this guy said, let's go to this place in Wilmot, Wisconsin. They're having a race there, and we'll go and watch. So I rode on the back with my dad. We went up to Wilmot. He was on his Suzuki X6 Hustler, and this guy, Carol Erskine was his name, who had Carol's Cycle Shop. Some of you may have bought some stuff there. And we got to the track, and there was a little tiny sign that said, race canceled, it's been moved to Barneveld. Well, we didn't know what Barneveld was or anything about it, but my dad looks around and goes, well, you know, nobody's here. It'd be kind of cool to ride around the track. So he gets out on his Suzuki X6 Hustler with low pipes, and I don't remember much about it that day, except watching my dad going, gee, I wish I could do that too. But there's my dad riding around, and Carol Erskine's riding on his Honda 305 Dream around this track at Wilmot, and all of a sudden this guy comes blazing up in a pickup truck and goes, what do you guys think you're doing here on my land? And my dad goes, well, nobody was here, so we thought it'd be okay to ride. And the guy goes, it's okay if you pay me $2. So my dad gladly hands out the $2 and then said, hey, can we come back and do this again? The guy goes, sure, as long as you pay me. So the following week, we loaded up the 2 little Honda 50s, which we still had, into my dad's TV van, and we went to this Wilmot and rode and rode and rode and rode, and that to us was just like the greatest thing in the world that we'd ever experienced. So then Carol Erskine said, hey, I saw an ad or a flyer. There's this thing called a Moto X at Elkhorn, Wisconsin on November 2nd, 1969. So let's go check it out. So we drove up there, and turned out that it was, of course, not just a Moto X. It was the Interim that Ted Keeper rode, and Torsten Hallman and Bengt Ahlberg and all these guys. Well, guess who spoke Swedish in the pits with these guys? My dad, who the Swedes, I mean, my dad's Swedish was, I guess, pretty good, you know, kind of a Swinglish kind of thing, but he knew enough to be able to chat with these heroes, and they got a big kick out of the fact that here was this guy from Chicago speaking Swedish with them, and so they took a shining to him. So, you know, that's kind of our introduction to going to Elkhorn, which was hallowed ground for all of us. So the first thing my dad says, well, I got to get a real motocross bike. We didn't know what a real motocross bike was so much. We had a Ducati 160 Monza Junior was the first bike, but hey, had some knobby tires on it, so it must be okay. And we started going to the races. But my dad said, we got to get involved in this sport from the beginning, ground zero. We got to join the slowpokes. And so we went to those meetings in Twin Lake, Wisconsin at Jack Morgan's house. And I remember you had to go to a couple of meetings first and have everybody get to know you and find out if you were really serious about joining the club or not. And we had to sit outside on Jack Morgan's porch while they voted on you inside whether or not you could be a member of the Slowpokes. And my dad and I are sitting out there waiting, and I'm going, Dad, I don't know, I'm just a little kid, I don't know. And I said, maybe they'll let you in the club, but I don't think they're going to let me in the club. But then I think it was Emil who came out to let us know and welcomed us with a shake hand, said, you are members of the Slowpokes. So we were officially a part of the thing, and I started racing in the fall of '70, and you saw some of that footage on the thing of my first or second race at Byron. My dad was 45 years old, but this is a little story, quick one, about how he supported me. We're at Byron. He's racing the 250B class. I'm in the 100 class. And so after 250B, it was like open, and then my race in the 100 class. Well, my dad crashed in the first moto. It was dusty. It was hot. All he remembers is getting up and some guy with a Husky's foot pick hit him in the back and punctured 2 back ribs and his lung. Only thing is, when the ambulance guys went to get him, he said, look, my son's getting ready to go to the starting line, and I don't want to get him all messed up thinking about me getting hurt, so don't say anything to him. Well, okay, it's kind of weird that I'm on the line and I don't know where my dad is. And my mom's with me, and I raced, we got done, we look around, I mean, my dad is not there. And we waited and looked around, and finally we went to Joe Vincer and said, do you have any idea where Wally Wallenberg went? And they go, oh yeah, he crashed. They took him to North Rockford Memorial Hospital. So we had to get somebody to help and load up our stuff, and my mom and I drove to go see him in the hospital. He was in intensive care. They wouldn't let me go see him because in those days, well, I don't know, I was too young and too small, and you know, of course I looked a lot smaller always than I really was until quite a long time. But anyway, so that pretty much, that crash ended up his racing days. He hung up his leathers after that, but at the same time, we, again, because of the Swedish, the Torleif Hansen, the Swedish superstar, took a shining to my dad, and also maybe a little bit to my sister Linda at the time. But he came to visit us at our house and stayed between the races at Elkhorn and St. Louis, Missouri. And when he came to the track, we got to ride that day at press day with them. And he took one look at my DKW and said, what are you riding that thing for? And my dad goes, well, what do you recommend? We hear Husqvarna's coming out with a 125 next year. Torleif goes, look, I'm a factory Husqvarna rider. Don't say you heard it from me, but there's another bike from Sweden called a Monarch that I think is a lot better for Scott. So my dad remembers this conversation, and when we start thinking about finding a Monarch, turns out there are no Monarchs in the Midwest, and we called up the importer, a Swedish guy in California. My dad speaks a little Swedish, says, hey, we want to get a Monarch. Well, we don't have any dealers in Illinois. So my dad said, oh, well, how do you become a dealer? Oh, you have to order 4 motorcycles and 10% in parts. So my dad starts thinking, we could get some bikes for dealer cost here if we could get 4 guys to buy them. So I had one, and another guy by the name of Hans Damstrom, who was a Volvo mechanic, another Swede, says, well, my son Rolf, he'd probably like to get one of those bikes too. So we had 2 down. So now we had to find a couple more guys to find these Monarchs and so on. But so anyway, I think a lot of you know that bike at the time was a pretty hot motorcycle, and I raced the first time on it and won, and things just really started to progress from that. And So we started our little business. My dad liked the Monarch brand so much, he wound up being a sales rep for them in the basement of his TV shop. They never knew that my dad never quit the TV shop. He just put a different phone number on so that when people from Monarch in California called, we'd answer the phone, Nordic Racing, but my dad was still doing the TV business and that, so. But you know, he never let things slow him down. For instance, how many of you remember when the gas crunch hit here in Illinois and you couldn't buy gas more than $2 at a pop? Raise your hand if you remember that deal. Okay. My dad goes, I got the perfect idea. I saw an ad, you can buy a 50-gallon gas tank for the van. So he bought an accessory 50-gallon gas tank and drove around every single gas station in the North Shore area, getting $2 at a time to fill up that tank with 50 gallons. He goes, now we can go to Texas and back, and nobody's going to stop us. So that was the kind of thinking that he did. And so, anyway, at the end of 1974, we realized that the Monarch and the European 125 was doomed. A $1,400 125 from Europe or a $700 Elsinore from, you know, it just wasn't going to work out. So when I was in California, Dad came with me I got to race a little bit out there. We met the guys from FMF, and we decided that maybe these guys from FMF, they're hippies, he said, they're kind of crazy out there, but he goes, they really know how to make these bikes go fast, and I think we could sell this stuff back in the Midwest, because he was always thinking about what my job would be. I was supposed to go to college, kind of, but I had this offer to go race in California for free. My dad goes, you can always go back to school. This California experience is a lifetime deal. You got to go do it. So that's when I met these guys from FMF, and we started this business, and we were selling FMF parts in the basement of the TV shop. And I drove around, I think a lot of you know, selling FMF stuff out of the back of my van and going to dealers, and it was a really, really fun experience. And he realized that, oh boy, well, to get publicity, you need to talk to the magazines. And this little paper opened up called Cycle Times. And when my dad said, I'm going to go over there, maybe we can get a write-up on our business and get this FMF stuff popularized, and I'll buy an ad. He kind of knew how that worked sometimes. So anyway, they said, well, we don't have an ad sales guy. We need one. Do you know anybody? And my dad goes, well, my son. And that's how I got my start in advertising. It was by going over there and saying I could sell ads. And the first guy I sold an ad to, by the way, is not here in this room. He was here last year, was Vic Krause. So it was kind of like, hey Vic, this is Scotty Wallenberg. You remember me? You know, I raced motocross in the area. Oh yeah, Scott. Yeah, I know you. Yeah. Well, I'm working for this new paper called Cycle. Well, it was called Illinois Cycle News, and then they got sued by Cycle News, so I had to change the name. I said, would you like to buy an ad? And I think Vic said, yes, I would. And I think I replied, you would? So that was my start doing that. But anyway, as we move on to my dad, he continued to support my pro career. I mean, I dreamed about being a pro motorcycle racer, and I got to do that. And Olaf Ann, who is in this room, so there he is, Olaf was my sponsor for my engines on my Makos. And you know, those were just great times. But one little funny story is Mako Midwest was Roger Debenham, and he authorized the bike, but he said you had to work through a dealer, and the dealer was Vic Krause, and then you had Olaf Ann doing the engine work. So when the bike blew up, which it did a few times, Vic would always say, well, I think, you know, you should talk to Olaf about getting the parts, because Vic didn't want to pay. You know, so it was always a thing, and Olaf would go, well, I don't have them, you know. And sometimes Mako stepped in. But anyway, thank you, Olaf, because we had some fast bikes in those days. So. But I had an injury at Byron in 1978, and that kind of ended my pro career, really, to do that. And then I went on and got the magazine job in California. And my dad was very supportive about that, knowing that when I moved away, it kind of left a big void in his life from going to motocross every single race, and I was gone. And so he got involved with video right at the beginning. He was the first guy to learn how to transfer those videos you saw were transferred by him upstairs. He figured out a way to make mirrors and cameras and dub in music from the On Any Sunday record that was spinning around, and to make those movies. So he was one of the first guys to do that, and so I'm grateful now. At the time I didn't really think much of it, but to have all of that stuff documented, because those old Super 8s all wear out. So that's what he did, and unfortunately in November 7th of 1982, unexpected, he had a heart attack, and he passed away then. So, but in closing, what I'd like to say is what I kind of call my Wally top 10 list for a lot of you that remember some of these things about him. Number 10, his Swedish connections. You betcha. That went a long way for our career. It's Swedish. I think a lot of you, I know Alex Apt will probably remember some of these stories too in the back, but my dad was kind of legendary for his frugalness when we were traveling and so forth. Doing things like maybe, to make a warranty work, figured out a way to turn an odometer back. We'd go to a little hotel and he'd always go and say, hey, I'd like the salesman special, whatever that was. I remember at Elkhorn, a guy said, my dad goes, how much is a room? He goes, well, on the first floor, they're $12 a night. But on the third floor, they're $8. And my dad goes, what's the difference? He goes, oh, we've got really nice paneling on the first floor. My dad goes, we can't take the paneling home with us, so we'll take that one upstairs. Oh, the other thing he did was, maybe some of you did this too, we'd go to Byron, we lived in Evanston. Why pay those tolls? So we would take like Gulf Road to Higgins Road to whatever to avoid paying those tolls on the Northwest Tollway. And I think we went to Verona the same way. Let's go to Milwaukee and cut over instead of the faster way to save those tolls. So, his helpfulness to every rider. He helped everybody that needed help. I know Monarch guys especially at the time, but one time, Brent Ewan, who's not here right now, but Brent, he was here at last year's reunion. We were in a tremendous battle, along with a fellow named Timmy Miller, for the 100cc Slowpokes Championship. And Timmy, Brent's bike fell off the trailer on the way to Byron, and he had a Monarch, and it was toast. So I'm thinking, ooh, oh gee, too bad. But my dad immediately sizes up the situation and goes, wait a minute, I've got all of Scotty's spares and stuff. Let's get to work on this thing. And boom, he puts it together. And I don't remember the results that happened that day, but I do know that Brent Ewan won the title over Tim Miller by just a handful of points. I had broken my hand and missed 2 races and lost it. But that was just the kind of guy he was. If you needed help, it didn't really matter. So, anyway. Then maybe you remember the typical Wally humor, because that guy, he loved to joke and laugh around. And this is a little story. Well, we were camping at Verona. He left the van in the middle of the night for a pit stop, and he accidentally stepped on Steve Sprisler, who was sleeping in a sleeping bag with his girlfriend. So, anyway, what my dad said, well, I'm not sure if they were sleeping or not, but I know that when I said to him, I said I was sorry, Steve replied, no, Wally, thank you, I needed that extra boost. He also turned our house on Simpson Street into a workshop. Literally, it was cold, too cold in the van to change tires and stuff. We brought bikes into the living room. We brought bikes into the kitchen. My mother, I know, is having a conniption about that. What are you guys doing in here? Hey, it's a race. It's too cold outside to change those Akron rims on a Trelleborg tire. And so we did that. And he also had creative ways of discipline. One time he got a speeding ticket, but to show me a little lesson about that, Those were in the days you had to post bond and go to the police station. This was in Chicago, right in past Maxwell Street. Not a great area to get a speeding ticket or to go in. However, he said to the cop, look, while I sign the papers, would you take my son on a little tour through the jail? So I literally walked around through the jail and looking at these guys behind bars. And he said, I just want you to know that I don't want you to ever be in that situation again. So now you can see what jail really looks like. So it's not glamorous at all. So that was something else. Circumvention of mindless rules. How many of you guys went to Sycamore? Did you know at Sycamore Speedway you weren't allowed to go into the pits unless you had a driver's license? So I was only 14 and a half and I didn't have a driver's license. I had to sit outside the stands while my dad was in the pits at Sycamore. But then he read that in Florida, you could get a driver's license when you're 15 years old. My sister Christine, who was a year older than me, okay, she was 15, and my grandmother lived in Florida. So he got the idea that you had to have a letter from the school stating your age. So he said, Chris Wallenberg is 15 years old, and I went down there to Daytona, or to Florida, and got my driver's license at 14 so we could go into the pits at Sycamore. And they were so angry. that was it. The last thing he would do is he would ID everything we had. He was really worried about somebody stealing things. And so he'd put our social security number on our bicycles and so forth. Well, I didn't think much about it, but in 1974, I had a very special Monarch engine that came from Sweden for Marty Smith. Marty never raced it. It came to me. I was very lucky about that. Well, I've always wondered what happened to this engine, and 40 years later, a month ago, a guy posted some pictures on the Monarch Facebook page that he had some stuff in Zion, Illinois, and I went back there and I found that engine with my my social security number on the cases. So, and when I saw it, my hair, which is standing on end right now, I'm going, I can't believe it, but that was another Wally deal. So I just want you to picture this in your mind. You can probably see him, if you knew him, in his orange trelliboard cap, with his overalls on, with a cigarette dangling out of his side of his mouth at the trophy presentation going, on a Monarch, on a Monarch, on an FMF rider, on anybody that was a friend. He cheered for every guy in that thing. But he told me once, I asked him if he had any regrets. And he said, you know, I don't have any regrets about our racing, but he said, you know, one thing I never did, I never got a trophy racing motocross, and I always wanted one. And so I just want to say thank you very much for the fact that he's going to get a trophy now. So thanks, everybody.
Doesn't get any better than this.
Thanks, everybody.
I want to thank everybody for allowing us to put this on and coming and supporting it. I've got so many of my own personal fond memories of Wally.